still got one more minute, so I'm just gonna keep waiting. Let's see, we've got, who are we missing? We're missing,
Nobody?
we've got
Missing nobody.
everybody.
We got
Wow.
full
Compliment.
group for the first time.
The first time, yeah.
Yeah,
Is this the last one of the year?
maybe for me.
Are we not doing another one next month?
6.
For
I can't remember. I don't know.
Do we have a meeting scheduled in December?
I just do what my calendar tells me to do.
I can tell you. Yeah, December 17th if we want to.
Okay. If we have,
Yeah.
yeah. You ready, Hunter? All right. Call the planning board meeting of November 19th, 2024 to order. We have a quorum. We are not missing one member. Yay. We do not need remote participation, and if I could get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Second? Second. All in favor? So moved. We do not have anyone in the gallery there for public comment, so we're going to move on. Oh, whoa, previous minutes. Yep, sorry. Adoption of the previous minutes. Has everyone had a chance to look through them? Are there any questions, comments, or changes?
None of the above.
All right, so if I can get a motion to approve the
Motion to
minutes?
approve the meeting minutes as presented.
A second? Second. And your first one. Like, all in favor? All right, so moved. Now we get to the first item of discussion. So consideration of conservation subdivision zoning text amendment. Hunter.
Okay, so this is should be a fairly quick one. However, what is in your packets is slightly changed. Literally slightly. Trying to find the, where's the HDMI cable? Oh, you have it?
Oh, do you need it?
Yeah, do you need it? You don't need it? No. Give me one sec to get this pulled up. Thank you. All right, short, while I'm doing this, so this was a recommendation from the village attorney just regarding the word conservation easement and how it kind of reads. Mainly, the issue's been is that conservation land, or common open space is conservation land. I mean, that's how it's always been interpreted, meaning that land part of subdivisions that's either in the viewshed buffer or some type of common open space, amenities, has always been dedicated and platted as conservation common open space. Those words are interchangeable. The hiccup was with the way that it read, kind of, one, our old ordinance was completely bad. Luckily, the MDO was a little bit more clear on who held that conservation easement. So with some conversations with Rick, is basically stating that, hey, the simplest thing is to make sure it's just on the plat, that obviously, in which most plats obviously state this, that common open space is platted conservation land, or, you know, for the use of the residents of the neighborhood, and the uses are then restricted per the CCNRs or per the ordinance. And so the easement term is what our attorney had some weird, basically wanted to change. So literally this change is taking out the word easement. It's also then adding a language into the development agreement and on the plat to make sure that's clearly identified. And this is basically all for all future or new, future subdivisions. Give me one sec to get this pulled up. Maybe? Yeah.
There we go.
So like I said, what's in your packets is slightly changed, so I'm going to go off of this copy. And there's two changes, because I think in the packets there was only one, or it referenced Article 7. So the first change is still to amend Article 7, the contents of the development agreement. Basically, that's just to add that the development agreement shall set forth and establish all common open space areas, improvements, and maintenance obligations. In the previous ordinance, we had maintenance agreements. New ordinance, all subdivisions, all developments that require a development agreement. So it's basically, instead of having two different agreements or kind of having those terminologies, we're putting the maintenance terms and obligations in the development agreement since it's required per the MDO. Is that clear with everybody? Okay. The second change is then what was in the packets already. Once again, it's just removing the word easement. changing it to as permanent conservation land, and then adding this, just in this language, instead of making it a plat requirement, basically it's just stating that the restriction must be noted on the final plat as set forth below. The common open space is shown on this plat is to be restricted, and no use or development shall be allowed except as provided in the Village of Marvin Development Ordinance. Article, go ahead.
That's a question about that. So the way that it kind of reads to me is that you can't, so no use or development shall be allowed except as provided, so that you could potentially develop that open space area as provided in the Village of Marvin Development Ordinance. So what does that mean?
So Article 21
How's it
outli-
protected if it's,
Article 21 outlines those uses of land, which I believe I did include that in your guys' packets as well. Since there's other section, like one, our attorney didn't want us to put like Articles X or 3, 5, list them all out. Because there's other articles that do apply to common open space, i.e. the Article 11, landscape and buffering, tree protection. Those maintenance obligations and uses in those areas are outlined, and those areas are typically in common open space. So that's why we just did the Village of Marvin Development Ordinance instead of trying to tie it to that one specific article. But ultimately, if it's platted as common open space, that's the term. That term lines up with what our MDO outlines. So then those uses are regulated per se through that, through the ordinance. Did that answer it?
yes. So like 21.2-4, that's what could happen in that, in those spaces if it is improved or developed?
Say that again, 21, which one?
21.2-4, improvement of open space.
That talks, yes, that's one of them. The other one, so you have the types of open space in 21.2-7, which that's really kind of then how it's platted for the most part. But the other one is 21-2-10, which talks about the land acceptable for open space designation. Talks about the landscape buffers, as well as basically undeveloped land with the slope of 18% or greater, and other park space and stuff.
Okay. The only thing I thought was odd was the baseball field, or the ball field. Wait, where was that? 2.1. Sorry, this is a long section.
21.2-7 says the types of open space.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't see a baseball field.
It's -4. Demarked ball fields. I mean, that's open space, but it's not necessarily usable, but yeah, and that's not the part we're changing, though. I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
And those improvements of open space, some of those open space amenities also have to comply with the permitted uses, meaning that, and I'm not looking at Article 8, but like athletic fields and certain parts of that would have to be a permitted use in the SFR district for that to apply, or for that to be a amenity per se. But a lot of that's still going to be identified and outlined on the development plans.
Would they have to get a permit in order to do, because it's a permanent protection, do they have to get a permit in order to do any improvements to open space if it's already been platted?
In what regards? Like, are you saying if you had like just land, like open, like land that's platted as dedicated open, or that's open space but doesn't have any type of amenities and they wanted to do amenities? Yes, it will depend on what, but yes.
Okay. Cool.
Any questions? So I think, since I changed this after the packets went out, may need, the motion may need to be as amended. And then I'll get a copy of this to Austin but like I said, it was just minor changes. I also sent this to Rick. Rick was good with these proposed changes, had no issues, since we do have that contract with Infocus for basically 2 years of ongoing maintenance and support, for the MDO. So went ahead and got his thumbs up on it as well.
So the motion would be to recommend approval of the proposed or amended zoning text amendment as amended, so.
It'd be proposed zoning text amendment.
Proposed zoning text amendment as
Yes,
amended,
that is correct.
presented.
It was presented.
It was presented, but the amended, yeah,
I would say as amended.
as amended, okay.
I think that's the safest thing, because then we'll just make sure that this is the copy in the minutes.
Okay, we do not have Austin here to change the wording, so we're
Yeah.
going, I just
Okay.
need to update.
Look at you, pulling me go.
Boom. So sassy, okay. Would anyone like to make that motion unless you have other questions?
No other questions? I'll go ahead and make it. Make a recommendation for the approval of the proposed zoning text amendment as amended.
I'll second. Anybody have all in favor? All right, so moved. All right. Now the moment we've all been waiting for. Board of Adjustment training sessions.
So we can do this however planning board would like. I do want to kind of just hit some very high level stuff, but the biggest thing I wanted to make sure you guys have with some of these guides and resources just to, either read in your spare time or be able to reference. Now with the adoption of the MDO, planning board wears the same hat as, or has a different hat, Board of Adjustment when needed. Board of Adjustment's responsible for hearing all variances, now special use permits that as well, and appeals of administrative decisions and vested right decisions. The biggest ones that you guys will probably see is going to be anything special use permit related or variance related. The biggest difference from our old ordinance to new, and I'm sure you guys heard Rick say this a lot of times, is that our old ordinance had uses in there that were quote-unquote special uses but shouldn't have been. So really the special uses in the current MDO are some of the bigger, scarier, crazier things that you may see. And at the same time, variances are still likely. We almost had one with the previous detached garage that we discussed last week, because that was an avenue that he could have went. With that being said, the biggest difference, or when it comes to quasi judicial hearings, is it's like a court case, and you guys are the jury. It's supposed to be formal, and I present the evidence from a staff standpoint, meaning if it's for a special use permit, what the application is, how it complies with the ordinance, and same thing with the variance, kind of what that request is and what the variance request is. We've had 2 variances since I've been here. Both of them were approved. Both of them were for detached structures that technically actually now comply with the ordinance. So, but going through those hearings, my role is to present it as cleanly, factually as possible. The applicant then has, his opportunity to speak, as well as then you have factual testimony. What that basically means is that if Joe lives beside John and doesn't like John and doesn't want him to do whatever John's requesting for, if it's a variance special use permit, Joe can't just say, hey, I don't like John. He's got to have factual information. He can still be heard, but you guys as a board have to then filter out what is factual testimony versus what is opinion per se. The other biggest thing in these hearings is ex parte communication, which basically means you guys get packets prior and typically will kind of know if one of these things are submitted. You're technically not, when I say technically, you are not allowed to discuss the the case outside of the meeting. You are, as an individual, able to go and get familiar potentially with the site, i.e., if, an address is going to be on the application. But you're not allowed to have conversations with the applicant, with any other of the board members. It's supposed to come in with a, unbiased opinion, and just hear the facts of the case. The other one, too, is,
Can I comment on that as well? Because years ago, we had a quasi-judicial, and we didn't necessarily know it was we weren't really aware yet, and we had the planning board had all these folks emailing us personally, and what's that? Yeah, and so we were not allowed to respond to them, other than we will be addressing it on X date, so it's been a while since folks have kind of come at us like that, but you cannot, I would just not respond or just forward the emails on to the staff, so.
yeah, and that's the best way to approach it. Like I said, these are very one-off cases. And I wanted, once again, since we had some time, didn't have a lot on the agenda, wanted to at least get you guys these resources and potentially then see what I can do from a staff level to help you guys prepare. What I'm thinking is potentially try to do at least one mock hearing or something once a year, just so you guys kind of keep those fine-tuned kind of procedural things. I wanted to do that tonight, but due to timing and trying to set it up, I think I've got one. I want to kind of make it to Marvin where you guys at least know the area, but I also then have to be careful and not try to then make it, somebody take it the wrong way, even though it's a mock hearing. But it also would give an opportunity for, polling me for minute taking and just kind of going through all that. Is that something that you guys would still be interested in doing in the future? Obviously, it's going to be depending on application load, kind of what we have coming down the pipeline and the work that would take precedent over that for the board. But if we have in January, for example, if we don't have anything going on or not much on the agenda, then that would be a prime time to probably go ahead and do that.
I think it's the best way to learn.
Yeah.
Going through them up, seeing it actually in front of us, and that would teach us more than reading.
Yeah, my goal would be is try to bring in maybe a council member. I need like somebody else to role play, basically to be like the applicant, or I can just try to set it up where there's background information for you guys to read, like, hey, like the chair knows this person, she has to, like, kind of setting it up like that. Like, I'll just have to play around with the best way to do this for you guys, but I definitely think, to your point, it's the best way to learn. Like I said, we'll go through a full formal hearing and let you guys weigh the facts and make the decision and use that as a learning experience. In the packets, I've included a few things for you. One is a presentation from a Board of Adjustment seminar I attended back in 2018, just kind of going over all quasi-judicial decisions. Some of this maybe has changed with 160. I'd have to go back and check, but for the most part, the formality of quasi-judicial decisions are outlined within this PowerPoint. I've also included a school of government, just kind of reference material for you, as well as the articles in our ordinance regarding Board of Adjustment and then variance hearings. Once again, don't have to necessarily dive into it too much. Does anybody have any questions specifically on quasi-judicial Board of Adjustment type stuff that either I can answer now or at least go ahead and start kind of gearing on what you guys really need to or want to learn the most out of it?
I have a question about, and I haven't gotten to go through all the materials you've given us, but I've always struggled with what are the definitions of a necessary hardship, and how is that proven? Is there a guide? Is there?
Let me think.
Because one person's hardship is not someone else's hardship. You know what I mean?
Correct. I think That's where in those specific cases, like, for example, like one of the variances that, that we had in January, one of the last ones we had, it was for the gentleman that lives on the corner of Woodland Forest and Newtown Road. He put the detached garage in the front of his house. His hardship is that the house had to be placed where it was at due to previous factors from the previous landowner, because that lot was subdivided. That had nothing to do with him, nor was his knowledge until they literally started digging. Basically, like, I believe that was an old horse riding arena. Basically, they just dumped a bunch of wood or did like a big burn, and that's what like that front of the his lot is. So it's not stable. So the house had to be placed back where it's at. Then he's on septic, so that limited him putting in that in the rear yard, and then there's a drainage ditch to the left. So he didn't really have it, even though he had plenty of land, his factor of where the house had to be built hindered then him being able to use the property to have at that time, compliant detached accessory structure. So that was the hardship that was presented. Once again, it is a court case. I mean, it's like a court case, so it's still your guys' kind of interpretation of what that hardship is. In the times when I'm presenting the evidence, I'm going to provide a recommendation, or at least provide that I do believe to how I interpret the ordinance and what's being presented to me, that if it's a hardship or not. The other thing is 99% of the time, everybody has a right to apply for a special use permit and variance, but I'm gonna tell them like, hey, I don't believe that this is a hardship or meets that one of those 4 definitions of, that kind of determine a variance. However, they still have a right to do that, and it's your guys' decision ultimately. So if it's coming to you, it's typically that I think that they have a case, or that they have some type, they have the evidence to at least present it to you to make it a case. So you, in theory, won't see one that you're like, type of like 50-50, but still, it is still kind of an interpretation of how you guys believe the evidence is being presented.
I was going to say, so in the case where they needed to build the garage in a different location, so the hardship, the other person could say, well, that negatively affects my property value, because now I'm looking at my kitchen window, and instead of seeing a forest, I'm now seeing a building. And is that something that you would review prior? Or
No, that's so, and that's a good example. You always hear things are gonna hurt my property value or all this, but
we're not in my backyard.
correct, unless they literally have documentation, meaning that, I don't know, an appraiser, that could be a qualified testimony. An appraiser comes and lays out the evidence saying, hey, based off of my experience, these detached garages that are closer to the property line or in the whatever, that is obstructing view from neighboring properties, something along those lines, do hurt property values over time. That, in my opinion, is factual testimony. But to your point, if they're just saying, hey, I don't want to look at it, it's a feeling and it's an opinion, and it's definitely, it's hard. That's kind of the hardest thing with quasi-judicial, is you have to kind of filter that out, because you got to make those decisions based off fact.
And then taking it one step further, so what if we said, well, okay, you don't want to look at a brick building, but do we make a recommendation that they get in a artist and paints a forest on the side? I mean, again, I'm not trying to be a wise guy, just how far can we give other options? Because again, you've seen some really nice paintings on the side of buildings that are very tasteful. I'm not talking about graffiti, but this way somebody really could do something like that. They could be wildflowers.
I don't think we're allowed to make
So,
suggestions.
well, that's what I
Yeah.
want to just try to filter out.
So this is the presentation that I did for the variance that we were talking about off of Woodland Forest and Newtown Road. And we'll kind of just maybe go through this and maybe kind of help you kind of decipher. But the request was that for basically to have a detached accessory structure in the front yard, which was in front of the established building line of the principal structure. And all this was per our old ordinance for accessory structure setbacks and where they could be placed. So that was so this is kind of how I outlined the case, showing the property. You can see that this is an old aerial, but that's where the whole horse riding rink was. This was an example of the building that he was proposing to be same looking characteristic of the principal structure. Then I kind of get into surrounding land use and zoning. I mean, similar to what you guys see in any type of land use the recommendation you guys are making. But then when you get into it, and this is kind of once again providing you context of the land. Let me get to, there's just definitions. Let me get to where I get into the approval criteria. So this is per the old ordinance. It's still pretty standard in ours, but you have 4 kind of findings of fact in any Board of Adjustment here for variances. One is the unnecessary hardship. Basically that the strict application of the ordinance, meaning that if we apply the ordinance by interpretation, how it reads today, would basically hinder the individual property owner or the one making the request right to do with what he wants with his property, and or he can't follow the rules because of other factors, and that's what this kind of outlines. So the hardship per se is that based off the ordinance reads and the other factors that are in the other findings of fact coming up, he would basically, he's not allowed to have any type of accessory structure on his property. In any other circumstances, people would be able to, but it's because of where that, like, the house is really far back, and it's, once again, the septic's all in the back, so there was no viable place for him to put this.
Can we go back to C? The hardship is not the result of actions taken by the applicant or the property owner, and it's the parentheses. So the act of purchasing property with knowledge that circumstances exist that may justify the granting of a variance shall not be regarded as a self-created hardship. So this is the part that gets me, because not that, and this wasn't a variance, it was done when we were looking at the development, but the development that went in, or that's starting to go in down where the farm with the little mini donkey that used to be there right near the Joe Car and Marvin. So one of the things that they were asking for was to reduce their setbacks because of the, I don't know, the wetlands or whatever.
Yeah, it was
right?
the riparian buffer.
Right, because they were trying to get more homes out of the property. So to me, that's not a hardship. Like, you have to put what the property can yield these amount of homes. Like, we shouldn't have to reduce our standards so that you can make more money, right? And that we went on and it was what it was. But, so with this same type of, like, they bought that property knowing that there were wetlands that they couldn't necessarily build on. So this, to me, this is the same type of thing, and it's like,
The biggest difference, though, between that and an actual variance is that wasn't a variance.
no, I know it wasn't a variance, but like, it's that same thing with, like, you're buying a property knowing there are conditions that exist that might require a special request or whatever it is. But this is saying that that's not a hardship, like,
The way it reads is that it's still open to kind of, in a way, your interpretation. To your point, when somebody's going through property for and doing due diligence on the property or the house or whatever, there's certain things that are obviously identified. There's certain things that may not be. Wetlands is kind of a prime example in a property because wetlands pop up. I mean, they develop over time. They also go away over time. And so, on most of these developments per se, for example, they don't really probably get into the full environmental part until they get their sketch plan approved, and they don't really buy the property until they get their sketch plan approved. So there's certain factors of that, you know, once again, it still can go, I guess, either way. You know, once again, it's like a court hearing. They're supposed to be providing all the evidence. They're supposed to be truthful with you, meaning that is a question you can ask the applicant if this information was disclosed when you were purchasing the property. If they say yes, once again, I think that's something that you guys can take in. I mean, it's not a perfect answer, but at the same time, it's like it. There's someone out there?
Trick or treater was just a little late.
But
Open meeting, can you come and sit in the audience?
We didn't have a key to the door.
So when you, so let's say that this was, can you ask, so for this particular situation, are we allowed to ask things like, you know, okay, so I know there was a burn pit and there was just wood, like, I don't know enough about stabilized ground to say, I mean, I would want to know, well, why couldn't you just dig it out and put new fill dirt in, right? Why couldn't you stabilize the ground?
so.
Hardship is only like money, right? But if you have the money to build a $150,000, $200,000 garage,
That's where in a lot of these cases, and I've seen some in municipalities, like, that's, the ones that I have been involved in with, once again, they're kind of clear cut. I mean, it's ones that aren't going to be, in what my opinion is, of anything detrimental. But it's obviously still up to the board to decide that. I have seen cases that, you know, the applicant gets an attorney and they have factual or professional testimony, qualified witnesses. I've seen the municipality also hire or get qualified witnesses. So that would be stuff where, if to your point there, that we would probably then have to get those witnesses available to be able to answer some of those questions. Because some of that stuff is partly what does go into your decision. And like I said, I don't necessarily have that answer. But that's where the part of the qualified witnesses would come in.
so I guess my question really is, how much are we able to ask certain questions like that, to kind of dig in as to why it is a hardship?
I don't see why not. As long as you are basing it off the facts and the facts being presented, you're not asking, you're not, how am I trying to say this? I do not think you're getting out of your lane of what you guys, have kind of those authority to ask those questions. Now, don't quote me on that. That's where I'll make sure I'll have a lot of this outlined for you guys and for your mock hearing, as well as like answer to some of these questions. But for the most part, if you're asking questions that are relevant to the case and they are relevant to the findings of fact, I don't see why you can't ask those questions.
Okay.
But this is kind of, actually, real quick, I want to go back, though, to C. An example of a self-created hardship would be if you put in a pool in your backyard and then you wanted to do a detached garage, but then you don't have room in your rear yard to do a detached garage. That, you did that to yourself. I mean, that's, in my opinion, pretty much a self-created hardship. Or you wanted to put your house where it's at because it sits high up on a hill and overlooks the, I mean, it's, again, kind of self-created. There wasn't factors of the land that led to hindering where you could do something and can, I guess. So just kind of want to clarify that, because, yeah, if you do something to your property and you create that hardship, like, that's on you. But the biggest one that we do see is, to your point, is somebody purchasing property and not necessarily knowing, or maybe knowing, but then not knowing that that would impact their stuff. And it's kind of like, because zoning, they don't, I mean, So once again, it's kind of how you interpret that. So for this case, this was kind of the approval criteria, that this was pretty much my report. Basically saying like the newly constructed house had to be placed far back because of the prior use of the property and actions done by the previous property owner. The property was also required to front Woodland Forest Drive. That was the other big thing of the strict application of the ordinance because it's a corner property. If his lot faced Newtown, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because it's the front building line, because that would have then been, the front yard would have been the drainage ditch. He would have been able to put the building where it was at if the house faced the other way. So it's because, once again, other sections of the ordinance was this led to what, once again, where he had to place it on top of other factors. He had an 85-foot view shed as well. This kind of just gets into the septic drainage, but like this is just kind of outlining the findings of, what I determined in my report as findings of fact. It's just kind of literally clearly outlining the evidence of the case. And this kind of gets into the drainage and the view shed. So then the second criteria is that the variance is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the chapter and preserves its spirit. That accessory structure language basically said it needed to be, we had a section in our ordinance, if you recall, that property greater than 3 acres you could have a detached accessory structure in the front yard as long as it was in the same look characteristic of the house. This property wasn't 3 acres, and so that intent, even though it wasn't 3 acres, he was still meeting that with the design elements of the detached building. 3, in granting the variance, public safety and welfare has been assured and substantial justice has been done. Pretty straightforward. Once again, there is still, I'm trying to think, a good example of this would be in our ordinance, if you recall, we have adult establishments permitted in the manufacturing overlay, meaning that permitted as a special use, meaning that a property would have to be rezoned, then go through rezoning again, and then go for a special use permit for an adult establishment. Obviously, if they were to get through those first 2 phases and went through that, we'll see, we would, this is all hypothetical for anybody listening to, but that instance, you have to think about public safety. I mean, that is stuff where the use and maybe the evidence that the use brings or all that goes into, is it the best for the public? Is public safety being threatened? All that stuff. Like, you typically see it with, I've seen it with mining quarries. I've seen it like kind of your hard industrial uses that are typically outlined as special uses in a lot of ordinances. And that's where you typically get into this. And the fourth one, by granting of the variance with minimum, yeah, I mean, another one just kind of just straightforward. But, let's see, was that my last slide? Yeah. So once again, this is very high level, kind of just going through variance. I mean, you weigh it the same almost in a variance and special use. Variances, for the most part, you're going to see more, in my opinion, probably when it comes to residential type uses, either somebody's I can't even really think of a specific case because we have some parameters in the ordinance that you already have a little bit of flexibility on top of a lot of the lots already developed. So I can't think of a specific variance case at the current moment outside of like a detached garage structure. And those are only going to come up when houses probably have to sit as far back as they do and they're on septic. That's about, because for the most part, other than that, the lots are always going to be big enough to allow you to have a detached garage or detached accessory structure in the side and rear yard. But the special use permits are the ones which, once again, I don't foresee any, but they are there in our ordinance, because they're either protected by state statute that we have to allow them. Those are the big scary ones that I can't say for certain, but that may come down the line. And that's maybe what I'll try to do is for the mock hearing, try to think what is really practical, when I say practical, could happen, I guess, instead of something just crazy, where then it gives it a little bit more real-world application for you guys to kind of consider.
What was the last special use permit request that we received?
Well, the old ordinance had special use for pools that,
I mean, other than the stuff that then became just written into the ordinances. We were always doing like pools in the side yard, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, yeah.
I would have to go look. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. Another one that I've seen, and I don't think it's protected in our ordinance this way, but sometimes schools or like trade schools, Montessori schools, like type schools are sometimes protected as special use permits. But I'll go through our ordinance. Let's see. Let's just do this real quick.
And can they be continued if you don't feel like you have enough evidence? Like, for instance, a million years ago, there was a private school that was trying to build on land down the road. And there was an uproar from all the surrounding neighborhoods because of the traffic and traffic patterns and like that. It's already a tough intersection to get out of. So like if that had actually moved forward, which they withdrew their application, but if that had moved forward and we had not heard from like NCDOT about, what are the traffic patterns there? What are the, what is the solution going to be for that intersection? Because it already is awful. Like, would we would we continue it at another time until we can get that information? Or are they really supposed to, without that information, can we just deny it?
So all decisions are subject to appeal. Once again, this is one of those, I don't have a formal answer, but I don't see why you couldn't continue it. I would not probably recommend just denying it, because you would, if you deny it, I would want to make sure that, and then, like I said, in those kind of crazy cases too, our village attorney will be here. He was at the 2 variances, but to kind of help guide, make sure. But ultimately, if you deny it, you need to make sure you have the justification on the findings of, in the findings of fact that it doesn't meet these standards or whatever. Because once again, they're always subject to be challenged and appealed. So I think the safer option would be to continue, but I would just have to, we can look into that.
Okay.
So I was just looking through the table of uses, and I'm asking you guys this so I can potentially build a case. There's not really any special uses in single-family residential district, which is what 90% of Marvin, maybe 80 if you take rural residential. But rural residential does have some uses because it is our agricultural district, but it also does house some existing rural neighborhoods, does have some special uses in there, including like beverage products, bottling, dairy products. So I could potentially try to do a case around that. Like if somebody was to, I don't know, want to do I'm trying to think, like, because it still has to be based off uses. Or I could do something, like I said, kind of based off of a use in a different district, and just hypothetically, we'll just make a property zone that district and kind of do the hearing that way. Just trying to figure out what would work best for you. Because a lot of the special uses are going to be in that heavy industrial overlay, which means rezoning to industrial, rezoning to heavy industrial overlay, then apply for the special use permit. So the chances of them ever getting into the special use permit are slim. So I'm trying to find something that is more practical.
Yeah, residential, I mean, I guess someone with enough acreage could have a bunch of goats and want to start like a cheese making.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would buy from them if it was good. But I mean, so I mean, I don't know, like, what's a realistic? Oh, you've got one? Ooh, I don't know. You could see how it plays out, but it could also backfire, you know what I mean?
That's why I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, why don't you at least just tell him and then,
Okay, it's for garage, 3-car garage.
okay.
It has to be detached. It's a pie shape. And my dilemma is my land doesn't perk for new drainage field.
Hmm.
So I have to leave it there, so I need a special permit to put the garage on the side and be detached from the main body of the house. And I'm on a pie.
Let me pull up your property if you don't know.
Do like an aerial view of it.
let's hope nothing nefarious was going on in your backyard when Google's satellite flew over. Oh,
You're right here, right?
Yeah, I'm right there. So you see,
hmm.
right there,
So where would it have to go?
the garage will go to the right, right side, right in there probably.
Most likely you won't, I mean, we'd have to look at it with setbacks and stuff, but your property is kind of a prime example that could be subject to a variant, or that properties that are unique in this are probably the ones that you would see variance cases. Just because of the unique nature of the property lines and where the house sits and the environmental features. I mean, you have a power easement right here, which would limit, once again, where a house can be, I mean, so there's a lot of factors on your property that if you needed a variance, like it does probably have a case for it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have anyone to your side, so. Well, I mean, but it's so many acres away, it looks like.
It's less than,
Really?
to the right, yes, to the left, no.
Yeah, to the left, you're right on the line. I'm surprised you even were able to build your house up that close over. What's your side yard setback?
Your zone, you should be zone rural residential.
But you still have so much.
Yeah, because technically, from interpretation, even though, does your house face this way? Like,
It faces, yes.
this is still the front building line. Because the way this is not the front building line, so this, let's do this. Well, yeah, we'll just do it this way, because I know it's gonna be a mile, I mean. Basically, this is your front yard.
That's my, yeah.
So what I'm saying is though, so if we're putting a structure here and it's behind the front building line, then it's in the side yard per the ordinance, so you wouldn't need?
I wouldn't.
No. But you'd have to, obviously you would come and get a zoning permit from me, and on your plot plan, you would show that that building's behind your front building line. And as long as it complies with the ordinance, you'd be fine there. But in short, I'll come up with a case or two, either a variance or special use permit, and try to think through that and try to just build a mock case over the next month, because we'll talk about this here in a sec, but most likely we probably won't have a December meeting unless you guys really, really want to. But there's no applications. But, and maybe we leave it open, because once again, it's kind of depending on any application submittals, but ideally, probably do the mock hearing in January, once again, depending on workload. for the board. But as long as we don't, we don't have any, even if any rezonings or anything submitted, it maybe wouldn't even be there until February anyway. So, we just have to play that by ear. But yeah, plan on maybe a January mock hearing, give staff enough time to kind of build a case, and go from there. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions regarding Board of Adjustment, let me know so I can at least get you some of those answers or point you in the right direction. So once again, you at least have the resources. And for some reason, if we get a random variance or special use permit case and we haven't had a mock hearing, or you guys don't feel, let's say later down the line, want to kind of refresh the training, we can always do a special meeting a couple days before, at least, and just go through a training just to kind of refresh your guys' memory on what's needed, the procedure, and all that.
And is there a procedural outline that we would be following?
Yes, it should be outlined in the Article 6. Or the 20, okay.
Oh, I'm in that. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
You said that there was an appeal process. Who did they appeal to? So is it a state court or?
So there's two types of appeals. So one, there can be an administrative decision, meaning a zoning permit came, I didn't grant it because of how I interpret the ordinance. I'm gonna use Marcus, for example. Marcus provides me the documentation, but I interpret it the other way, that his front building line is this way, so that's technically front yard. He can appeal that administrative decision to the Board of Adjustment. And then it would be your guys' role to then interpret the ordinance and my decision and his argument, and basically you guys can overturn my administrative decision or you can uphold it. Anything the Board of Adjustment does is then can be appealed to the Court of Appeals. I don't know if I can go any further than that. It may. Yeah, okay. And so yeah, they would have to file that appeal, and then obviously they can either uphold it or overturn it as well. So I have yet, in my experience, to ever have any happen. I know they do, but I can't think of any specific cases that have been appealed and overturned. I know that the village has had vested right decisions in the past that have been appealed to the Board of Adjustments. And then I can't remember if those got upheld and then appealed again. I'd have to go back through the records. Any other questions? Well, like I said, go through that, and if you have any, just let me know. But we'll start prepping a mock hearing to do in the future, and as well as make sure that you guys continue to have some. I might start doing this, is maybe just putting a guide or some type of resource in your guys' packet just for something, just to read it if you want, or at least maybe know where it's at and reference it if whatever it's covering comes up in the future.
All right, do you have an update for us, or are we?
Oh, I did talk with council about the street lights.
What was it?
The street lights.
Yeah. We were just murmuring back here.
Yeah, they, from what I recall, basically, it was one of these that, we'd look at and coordinate with DOT, but that it is a procedure, and they did not think it was beneficial at this time, on top of the money that it would take. Do you recall that discussion further?
I do, I'm trying to remember the outcome of it. Did we say that we weren't going through with it?
That's kind of how it came out, but did you have any specific, did you want the whole road or certain intersections?
I think it's very dark.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, it's already, Charlotte has chosen to
get into Marvin, across that bridge all the way down, which makes it even darker. Curves, Charlotte's a straightaway, whereas you come into Marvin, that is turns and.
It's turn and it's up and it's a turn.
Yeah.
So everyone's accelerating into that turn. That's why we have so many people.
We've just had someone
Up
hit
the
the fence again. You know, that fence gets hit about 4 times a year. It's very dark. I would, you know, I'd ask you to reconsider that. That's a safety issue, and that's, you know, look, if there's one thing money should be spent by governments, it's safety.
So the one thing I can say is we can look into at least potentially looking at the intersection of Joe Carr and Marvin Road, because there may be spot safety funds through NCDOT available, because it was, with the accidents and stuff that have occurred there. But ultimately, the thing with the street lighting is that the village budgets for that, typically to install the streetlights are free. We just have to coordinate with Union Power and get NCDOT approval of a lighting plan, as well as any potential encroachments.
Yeah, that wouldn't come out of the Village of Marvin budget, would it?
We pay, yes.
Well, did we talk about the developer of the Sage, that their input or responsibility on that?
We never, no.
I don't remember, yeah.
All the streetlights out here, it is, but we pay for the lighting. So that was one of council's discussions, that's kind of, was it looking to do the whole road or certain intersections? But like I said, to get to where they're installed, typically there's no cost to us. It's time, but there's no cost. However, we then pay a monthly, and I want to say it's, once again, don't quote me on this, anywhere from like $15 to $30 a light per month.
For what?
For the power. Yeah.
$15 to power one light?
It's not much, but then they add up.
I don't pay the electric bill, so I don't know.
And what's the- and the
That's
cost
not
to-
one of my bills.
And I'm sorry, and the cost to install it, 100, 1,000?
Typically free. When I say typically,
Seriously? Why is Weddington Chase sitting there saying it's $2,000 per light?
Are they asking for a pole, though? Like, we would just be asking to
Well,
install a
tell
light
us.
on an existing pole, correct? On a
That's what Charlotte did.
so the two ways that do this, and if you look at the lighting design out here, is NCDOT has lighting standards. So if you're putting lights on, you have to light a certain amount of the road. And once again, it comes down to safety for lighting the road, but also safety on not blinding the driver type thing. We go through Union Power. Union Power develops a lighting plan, so it shows kind of the illumination and how that, making sure all the roadways or intersections are properly lit when we submit the plans to DOT. When they do that, they do a variation of using existing power poles where they can do a light extension, or they come out and install the wood, just standard poles. To install those wood poles, they have to be outside of the right-of-way most of the time. To be in the right-of-way, that's when the village would incur a cost, because they have to be a breakaway pole for accident purposes. So if they're outside of the right-of-way, no cost. However, what holds that up is getting either easements from individual property owners, which, once again, Union Power does, but it's still getting those easements from the individual property owners. Or if Union Power has an existing power easement already, it makes things a little bit easier. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but if all the stars align, it doesn't cost the village anything. It just takes time. Like these roundabouts, they got lit in 2022, if I recall. But Rohit and Christina were working on that prior to me. I got it across the hump, and I think they got installed in the spring of '22. Once they finished, and we already knew the other roundabout was coming, we went ahead and got on the planning for that roundabout so they could be installed right after. And I'm pretty sure they were installed within a month of the roundabout opening last fall. So that's what it takes, is it takes time. But ultimately, what council's discussion was, it came down to also the cost of lighting each pole.
So
So.
what is the, you were saying like, there has to be a lighting plan. I mean, are we saying that we can't just put lights up on the existing poles just so there's something there? Especially,
Not without DOT's approval, which requires a lighting plan.
so, because I mean, it's really what Mike is talking about is really from the county line, up through that upward curve, into that into the straightaway, into the Marvin straightaway. I would call it a Marvin straightaway. You know what I mean? We don't need like the whole, because then now you start, like, once you get up and around that curve near Firethorn, now you've got other lighting, like Firethorn lighting that's now kind of helping, you know what I mean? So, and the canopy is not completely covering. So if it's just a section,
I can reach out to Union Power and see, but at the end of the day, I don't want to then have them work up these plans or something, and then council, I mean, that is still going to be a council thing from a budget standpoint with the lighting those poles, but I can at least maybe reach out and try to get a preliminary estimate of how many lights they would need, or if they would have to install new poles, or if they can use the existing. And if that'd be sufficient, then a count of how many lights, and then that can get an estimate for budget purposes.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be something you could reach out to Union Town and say, hey, we're thinking about it, could you get, I mean, wouldn't they provide the lighting plan for you?
Yeah, so they do, so Union Power does the lighting plan, but, but that's the thing, like I said, every time we've done it, we knew that we wanted it and to do it. I want to try to at least get preliminary numbers before I say, hey, Union Power, will you help us get this and get approval with DOT if the council doesn't want to pay for the lights. But I will at least, next year, March, February. Yeah. But I will at least try to have those conversations with Union Power.
so don't be too long. Or you can just show up to their meeting and like do public comment.
Other than that, other just items, Sage at Marvin's gotten underway. They have received their approvals from, one, the village, but also the applicable agencies, DEQ and CDOT, so they have began land development. Heritage of Marvin is still wrapping up their initial kind of development, land development. They'll probably start constructing homes within the next month. They have already pulled permits for 20 to 25 of the lots. And they've only opened up, I think, the first block, so roughly half of the lots. So then they've either already sold or under contract with all those lots, to my understanding. Other than that, that's all I got, unless you guys have any specific questions on anything.
Did ZEPSA get approved by council?
Thank you for bringing that up. So the applicant, the council tabled that public hearing by request of the applicant last week. So the public hearing will now be December 10th. In short, the applicant had a few items that they wanted to finalize, like i.e. the elevations of that one building nobody liked. And they wanted to get that finalized. When council considers it, everything is presented and in final form. And then two, they had a few things of their due diligence with the historic trust property that they were finalizing as well. So they just requested to table it. Council opened it. We tabled it. So then we'll just reopen it back at the December 10th meeting for consideration.
Anyone else have any questions? All right, I don't believe we have any action items.
I do, but yes.
Well, you do, but yeah. All right, let's do board member comments, and let's start with Bob at the end. John?
Staff, thank you for your work.
Ditto?
Great job, Tommy, we didn't even miss Austin, so.
Oh, no, we missed him. We missed him. Mike Lavelle said they did not miss him.
They're an omission.
All right. Could I get a motion to adjourn? And a second? Second. All in favor? Wait. Mike Motioned, Rich seconded, and then the board approved, so.
So are we meeting December 19th? Meeting's over now, but are we meeting December 19th?
I don't,
Leave it on the agenda, or leave it on, yeah, we won't make any formal motion to change, but tentatively,